"Send 4,000 or you're out of this family," my son barked across the breakfast table. I hadn't even finished pouring my coffee. His voice was sharp, full of something colder than anger. Certainty. Across from him, my daughter-in-law smirked without looking up from her phone. "Consider it back rent," she muttered, like she was doing me a favor by spelling it out. I stared down at the countertop. The marble was smooth, warm in the morning sun, and expensive, because I'd paid for it. Just like the kitchen remodel, the down payment on the house, and the emergency daycare last spring when they didn't have it that month. I opened my mouth, closed it, and looked at my grandson's empty high chair. He'd just learned to walk last week. I thought this morning was about celebrating that. Maybe taking pictures, maybe pancakes. Instead, I was being invoiced for existing. I didn't say a word. I just set my mug down and walked back to my room. The converted guest room they now called the Overflow. My name was never on the mailbox, just on the mortgage. They wanted $4,000. A number picked not for logic, but for punishment. For saying no last week when they asked for a new SUV, for suggesting they wait, for reminding them I'd already paid enough. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed. I could still hear them in the kitchen. She was laughing now, telling him, "She'll pay." She always does. That part was true. I always did. I paid when his father died. I paid when he dropped out. I paid when they couldn't. Not just in dollars, but in sleep, in security, in years. But something inside me didn't move this time. Something stayed still, cold, quiet, thinking. I opened my banking app. Then I opened the folder marked Deed Co-Owner. And that's when I saw the first red flag. The guest room they gave me used to be a storage space. I cleared it out myself, boxed up their holiday junk, painted the walls, even installed shelves. It still smelled faintly of dust and old cardboard. But it was mine, or at least it was the only space in the house where I didn't feel constantly watched or dismissed. I moved in after they begged me to help with the mortgage, promised it would be temporary, said they'd pay me back, said I'd be part of the family again. That was nearly 2 years ago. Since then, I've paid for the new water heater, covered a 2-month gap in daycare, and even co-signed a refinance when their credit wasn't strong enough. Every time I gave, it bought me less. Less warmth, less voice, less space. Now, when I walk into a room, conversation slows. My daughter-in-law shifts her tone, lowers her voice, and tucks the baby tighter against her shoulder. "He gets fussy around her," she once said when I reached out to hold him. Then, to her friend on the phone, she whispered, "She's too old. I don't want him confused." Confused. He's my grandson. I changed her husband's diapers. I've earned the right to rock a baby to sleep without permission. But in this house, I'm not Grandma Lisa. I'm her, the one who's always around, who folds the laundry before they get home, who replaces the toilet paper when it runs out, who quietly pays the difference when their budget doesn't stretch far enough. They post pictures of the baby's milestones, but I'm never in them. I buy gifts for holidays, only to see my name replaced with "From Us" on the tags. I've been edited out of the family I helped build. I started staying in my room more, less chance of conflict, less risk of hearing "we've got it" when I offer help I know they need. Less of me meant more peace, for them at least. That's when I realized I lived in the house, but I didn't live in their lives. And yet, they never stopped using my name on the account. I can still picture the first apartment my son and his wife rented. 2 mismatched chairs, a mattress on the floor, a toaster that only worked on one side. They were young, hopeful, and terrified. I told them it would get better. I lent them money for their deposit, co-signed their first car loan, and taught them how to build credit. Each step forward for them felt like a small victory for me, too. When his father died, I didn't take a break to grieve. I took on overtime, tax clients on weekends, and a part-time bookkeeping contract at night. 3 jobs stacked on top of each other until my hands shook from exhaustion. 2 retirements delayed. 1 dream cabin by the lake sold off before I ever held the keys. I told myself sacrifice was love. I believed it with every bill I paid. Their lives bloomed. They went from renting to owning, from used cars to SUVs, from frozen dinners to restaurants with linen napkins. My contribution was never on the invitations, but it was always on the receipts. When they needed a down payment, I wrote the check. When the heater broke, I paid the contractor. When daycare demanded a lump sum to keep the baby's spot, I covered it before the deadline passed. Now I sit at the edge of my bed, eating leftovers cold so I won't wake the baby with the microwave. They go out to dinner and come back with shopping bags and stories about a new wine bar. I get the silent treatment if I forget to restock the oat milk. All the things I once gave without question have become the reasons they dismiss me. Proof somehow that I owe them more. I tell myself this is temporary, that once they're stable, they'll remember who steadied them. But deep down, I know the truth. This isn't temporary, it's a pattern. And tonight, looking at my banking app open on my phone, I see the first real sign of how deep it runs. That night, after they'd gone upstairs, I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone glowing in my hands. I opened the joint family support account, the one I had created so they would never have to scramble for bills or groceries. I hadn't looked at it in more than a year. My hands hesitated over the password, like it was a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. When the balance appeared, my stomach dropped. Transactions scrolled like a confession. Online boutiques, high-end restaurants, and then one charge that froze me. $200 luxury stroller. I live under the same roof as that stroller. I hear the wheels squeak in the hallway. But when I reach for my grandson, his mother turns her body away, murmuring something about routine and too much stimulation. The numbers kept coming. $800 for a spa package, $300 at a wine club. All of it under the heading household. I rubbed my temples. Household. When had household started meaning their indulgences with my money? I remembered the night they moved in, both of them teary with gratitude. "You're saving us," my son said. "We'll make this up to you." I had smiled, believing him. Now, those words felt like a script they'd rehearsed while the withdrawals kept clicking away. I scrolled back further. Charges to a travel agency, payments to a bridal consultant. They had been married 6 years. My pulse climbed as I stared at the screen. This wasn't oversight, it was a system. I was the system. Down the hall, I could hear them laughing softly, the baby fussing for a moment before going quiet again. The sound used to comfort me. Tonight, it felt like a locked door. I closed the app and sat still in the dark, the glow of the phone fading in my lap. For the first time, I allowed myself to see it for what it was. Not a family account, but an open vein. And as I stared at the ceiling, a thought began to form, steady and cold, leading me to the only person I still trusted to tell me the truth. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, I sent Ellen a message. She replied instantly, "Come by the office, I'll clear my evening." Ellen and I had known each other since we both worked the same temp job back in our 20s. She'd gone on to law school, I'd gone on to motherhood. Through it all, we stayed in touch. Holiday cards, lunch every few months, quiet check-ins. She was the one person I knew would tell me the truth without sugarcoating it. That evening, I walked into her office with a folder clutched tight in my hands. She poured the coffee. I handed over the account details and sat quietly as she logged in and started pulling the transaction history. Her expression didn't change, but I saw her fingers pause more than once. "You might want to brace yourself," she said. The first thing she pointed to, a series of luxury purchases, designer handbags, out-of-state travel, a weekend at a coastal spa I'd never even heard of. The total, over $96,000 withdrawn in 4 years. And it wasn't just the money. She turned her screen toward me. "Do you recognize this?" It was a loan agreement, a second mortgage filed under my name. My chest went tight. "But I never—" "They used your credit," she said gently, "without your permission." I stared at the screen, my name, my address, their signatures. "And this," she added, clicking to another line item, "is a $5,000 payment to a bridal consultant." "They've been married for 6 years," I said, more to myself than to her. Ellen leaned back, her voice low but firm. "Lisa, this isn't misuse, this is fraud." My mouth went dry. "Can I prove it?" "Yes," she said, "and you should, but this will be ugly." I nodded. I wasn't afraid of ugly anymore. Ugly was already in my house, wearing a smile and holding my grandson like I was a stranger. As I left her office, I didn't just carry the paperwork. I carried something else. Something harder than anger, but sharper than grief. I was ready to find out how deep this really went. I woke before the sun, the decision already sitting in my chest like something old finally rising to the surface. I didn't slam doors or shout down the hallway. I didn't even make coffee. I just sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The joint account was the first to go. I logged in, selected Freeze All Activity, and clicked Confirm. A dull gray padlock appeared on the screen. Then I called the bank directly, confirmed the block, and revoked all third-party access. Their debit cards would stop working before they finished their morning smoothies. Then I called the county title office. "Can I confirm something?" I asked, reading the parcel number aloud. "Was the deed ever fully transferred?" The woman on the line was polite, methodical. After a short hold, she came back. "It's still partially in your name, ma'am. There's a clause flag. Transfer pending final sign-off." I'd forgotten about that clause. They had too. "Place a hold on it," I said, "pending legal review." By noon, I had spoken to Ellen again and filed the initial paperwork. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just said, "Good." By 3 p.m., the SUV was gone. Not stolen, repossessed. The payments hadn't been made in months. I'd stopped covering those silently 2 quarters ago. The bank had been waiting for a missed deadline. I gave it to them. By 4 o'clock p.m., their phone stopped working. I'd been paying that family plan too. Not anymore. By 5, I was folding 3 sweaters into a travel bag, just enough for a week or two. I left the framed photos where they were, beside the baby monitor and the pile of unopened mail. I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. The sound of the door clicking shut behind me felt like the first real breath I'd taken in years. I walked past the stroller that had cost more than my first car, past the welcome mat I'd bought, past the life they built on my back, and I headed straight to the one place they'd never think to follow. 2 days passed. I stayed in a quiet motel on the edge of town, the kind with blackout curtains and no questions asked. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't read the messages. I needed distance, not noise. But on the 3rd morning, I dressed in a clean blouse, tied back my hair, and returned. They were waiting. The moment I stepped inside, the yelling began. My daughter-in-law's voice, sharp and high-pitched, accusing. My son's voice, louder, shaking the walls, demanding to know what I'd done. The baby was crying upstairs. The dog barked from the kitchen. Chaos. I stood by the entryway and let them run out of breath. Then I opened the folder. I laid the documents across the dining table one by one, like a hand of cards I'd been waiting to play. "Here's the bank record," I said calmly. $96,000 withdrawn over 4 years, most of it discretionary spending, none of it approved. My son's face flushed red. "This," I continued, tapping the 2nd page, "is the 2nd mortgage taken out under my name. Forged, illegal." His hands dropped to his sides. She looked away. "And here," I said, pulling out the final sheet, "is the current title of this house, still active under my name. You remember the clause I never signed off on?" Silence. "You barked at me to send $4,000 or leave the family," I said, my voice steady. "But I've given you 10 times that, more, and what I've received in return." I glanced at the cold leftovers on the counter, the untouched birthday card I'd written for my grandson, the stain on the carpet from when she called me useless for not catching the spill fast enough. "I'm done." My daughter-in-law opened her mouth, but no sound came out. My son looked like he'd been hit, but not enough to fall. Not yet. I gathered the papers, slipped them back into the folder, and turned to leave. "You want the house?" I said over my shoulder. "Then start paying for it." And with that, I walked out again, this time to finish what I started. I moved into the small lakeside rental that had caught my eye years ago, a place I once told myself I'd consider when things calmed down, when the world grew kinder. I never imagined I'd come here under such circumstances. But the air was quiet. The floors didn't creak with resentment, and no one scowled when I made coffee. Word reached me faster than I expected. First came the credit alerts. My son's name flagged across collections and denial lists. The 2nd mortgage, which they took without permission, was revoked. The bank reclaimed what it could, and what it couldn't it simply marked as default. Then came the bankruptcy. They filed it quietly, like shame sliding under a closed door. The house was no longer theirs to renovate, expand, or boast about. It was under legal review now, tied up in debt, just like their promises. My daughter-in-law, once dripping in name brands and comments about how I just didn't understand modern parenting, took a job at the mall folding clothes. She didn't tell anyone. I found out through Ellen, who happened to walk by and recognized her behind the register, folding sweaters next to a teenager with a nose ring. And the guest room I once lived in, the one I paid to remodel, to soundproof, to warm in the winter, they turned it into a walk-in closet. Shoes lined the walls, dresses hung from ceiling rods, drawers full of things I doubt she wears now. It looked like a museum of excess built on stolen ground. But I know something they haven't yet figured out. It doesn't matter how many handbags you hang on the walls. A closet doesn't fill the silence where love used to be. A house with no roots is just wood and brick pretending to hold meaning. Out here by the lake, I finally sleep through the night. No footsteps stomping above me, no cold glances, no demands. And when the wind rolls across the water and brushes the glass, I don't flinch. I just breathe and wait for the next morning. The lake became my clock. Each morning, I woke to its stillness, and each evening, I watched the sun drag its light across the water. Without the constant noise of their demands, my days began to expand. I started cooking again, not out of obligation, but for the simple pleasure of stirring something on the stove while music played softly in the background. I joined a local book club, walking into the library one Thursday evening with nothing but my name and a smile. They welcomed me as if I belonged, without needing to pay an entry fee. On Sundays, I brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for the woman I used to be, the one who stayed up late balancing their bills, who skipped lunches to cover their debts, who folded their laundry before her own. I set the second cup across the table as if she were sitting there. I looked at her and thought, "You did everything you could and more." I smiled at her now. She finally said no. The people in my book club didn't know my story. They just knew me as Lisa, a woman who liked mysteries and homemade bread. That was enough. They laughed at my jokes. They asked for my recipes. They treated me like a person, not a purse. I began to feel my hands again, not as tools, but as parts of me. I kneaded dough, planted a small herb garden on the porch, wrote letters I never sent. Every small act stitched me back into myself. Sometimes, in the early hours, I caught myself thinking about the old house, about the child I raised and the grandchild I barely held. The ache was still there, but softer, like a scar instead of a wound. By the time the first autumn leaves began to gather at the edge of the lake, I knew I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. And on the day I opened my mailbox to find a letter with his handwriting on the envelope, my hands didn't shake. They were steady as I carried it back inside. One letter. That's all I wrote. It sat on the kitchen table for 2 days, folded once, never sealed. I didn't plan to send it. I just needed to put it somewhere outside my chest. To my son it began. "You barked that I needed to pay $4,000 to stay in this family, so I left. And now that the money's gone, tell me, where did the family go?" I didn't add anything else. No please. No wounds dressed as explanations. I folded it carefully, slid it into the old ceramic bowl where I once kept spare keys and promises. Then I burned it. The ash curled softly into itself. It didn't scream, didn't resist, just surrendered. That evening I walked out onto the porch of my new life. The lake reflected the sky's last blush, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. Not an explanation, not a sacrifice, not one more dollar. No one calls now, not really. There were a few attempts at first. Blocked numbers, guilt-drenched emails, even a card that arrived with no return address and a smeared line of ink where a name once was. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. They only looked for me when the money vanished, when the silence grew too loud to ignore. But silence is a language too. And mine finally spoke. I sip my coffee slowly these days, read entire chapters without glancing at the clock. I've started baking again, not because someone demands it, but because I love the way cinnamon clings to the air. The version of me that begged to belong is gone. She didn't die, she just learned. She left quietly, but she took everything that mattered. And as the sky folds into night and the porch lights flicker on, I sit with that final line still lingering in my chest. Not bitter, not broken, just free.